Welcome to another edition of Close Mode, the Enterprise Sales Podcast. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, CEO of Close Strong, and today I'm really lucky and excited to be here with Stephen Oommen, who's the VP Global Strategic and Enterprise at Outreach. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Outreach, I can't imagine, it's a single sales execution platform that unlocks seller productivity to create and close more pipeline. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm just happy to be here, Brian. Thank you for having me.
And I got to know who you're representing today. What team are we sporting?
The best team of them all.
Nice. And yeah, for anybody listening, watching, Stephen said, "Should I put a collared shirt on?" We said, "Hell no." So, you and I were chatting a week ago, and I said to you, like, we don't talk enough as sales leaders, especially about kind of the soft stuff. And you and I started talking about confidence, and I was just like, man, it's such a needed topic. And I feel like we don't talk about it enough, and we all go through a period where it waxes and wanes, but we act like, tough men and women and pretend it's not there. So it's such a huge part of selling and sales leadership. So why do you think it's something that we don't talk about so much?
Ooh, that is such a good question. I think confidence in anything you do goes a long way. There's a lot of old adages, statements people say where attitude is 80% of the battle and, all these types of things. Confidence ranks up there with every cliche you can think of.
Yeah.
But I think as we've kind of progressed in society into this technological age, everything's AI. Right before that, everything was data. Everything was around this new technology, right? And while I'm not saying that's bad, but while that's great, what happens is everyone looks at the data, they look at trends, and it is much needed. But if you remember the movie Moneyball, it kind of reminds me of that, where it was such a phenomenal idea and it changed and transformed the way people looked at sports. They looked at baseball, but at the same time, it should never diminish the it factor, those athletes, those people, those sellers that just somehow, some way, they just get it done. Right. A lot of that has to do with confidence, and a lot of it has to do with process. There's things that build your confidence, but honestly, I think that's, in my personal opinion, part of the reason we don't talk about it as much is because we're so focused on data these days.
Yeah, I think it's true. And there's a lot of like motivational stuff around selling, but when you and I, like I said, it really sparked me because I would be probably very slow to go to any of my partners and go, "Hey, you know what? My confidence is getting whacked right now." I mean, it's just sort of verboten, like we don't say it. I suppose I might have other people, but even with my closest advisors, personal advisors, I don't know that I go and talk about this. So that's why I say it's so cool. You also talked about confidence being tied to the team around you, which I'd like to hear more about. Like maybe you feed off it or get pulled down from it.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing, and I relate a lot of what I do to sports. Mainly because if you think about the parallels between any athletic game and sales, very similar in terms of the spirit of competition. So I'm going to use something specifically around the game of basketball, and then I'll relate it back to selling. Have you ever noticed when one person catches fire and they shoot, and then all of a sudden the rest of the team has this confidence and everyone's draining a three from who knows where, and the most unlikely person, the 12th man on the bench, is draining half-court shots, and you're like, what is going on? And that's what I mean by team confidence, because winning spurs more winning, right? And when you think about that in sales, it's almost like the 4-minute mile. Like when somebody does something that seems unachievable, or they're consistently winning and winning and winning, they're basically proving that it can be done.
Yeah.
So literally everybody else on the team is like, well, if he can do it and he's proving it, then everyone can do it, right? So there's a lot of confidence that comes when you have the right people that can get it done. Man, it just permeates throughout the entire team for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking of that firsthand, like when stuff's happened in our business, and it's like, okay, boom, now, and it is. I think there's a correlation as we talk about this more between sort of motivation and confidence, but confidence is totally different. But I think you are right. Um, you said something about getting salespeople to the point where they don't need money, and as I was looking back through those notes, I know we had a correlation to confidence, but yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, this is just an opinion of one. Maybe a
Yeah,
lot of people who are listening share what I'm about to say. But I remember back when I first started in sales, this is my 25th year in sales, believe it or not. I was joking because I have more grays in my beard. I was joking with Brian earlier. I said, hey, it's a video podcast. I actually dyed my
let me
beard.
touch it up a little bit. Yeah,
Let me
all
touch it
right.
up, right? But yes, it's my 25th year in sales. And I remember when I first started, there was someone that I heard a sales leader once say, man, I want all of my people to be in debt because then they'll sell even more to pay down their debt. And it was more facetiously said, maybe
Yeah,
comically said, but there was a little hint of truth.
yeah,
And here's my personal experience. When I was in my 20s, I had a mentor that said, if you want to sell more, stop worrying about the money. And this was when I was building a couple companies in my 20s,
yeah,
and worry about the purpose, worry about the customer, worry about the prospect, like what matters to them. And all these things are normal in today's selling motion where we talk about customer obsession and we talk about what does the customer want, business acumen and all these things. Well, the reason this is important from a personal standpoint is when you are fundamentally secure in your personal needs, right? If we make the right decisions early on and we're not worried about the money, it frees psychologically our mind up where we actually don't need and don't really care. Well, we should still care about the
yeah,
commission, but we don't need it.
yeah,
So there's not a bias toward, I need this deal from a customer or a prospect. Because if you've ever been a buyer, we've all seen this, right? I'm assuming most of the audience are sellers, but we're all buyers as
yeah,
well. And you can sniff desperation, right? And I actually didn't really learn this lesson until my early 30s. I thought I was all about the customer. I thought I was all about the other person until I lost everything. It was late 20s, early 30s. And I realized you can lose everything in an instant.
yeah,
And when I came back the second time and I started building another company the right way, all of a sudden I just saw prosperity. I saw, the profits start to roll in, and I started to sell more because I didn't actually care about the money. Now, when it really started to work for me is once I got to a place of financial security where I didn't need the commission. I remember one time I was talking to a CFO, and this was when I was at Microsoft, and we were at the end of our fiscal year, and I remember that there was a small deal. It wasn't this massive deal, right? It was only like a $50,000 deal. It didn't move the needle on their P&L that much. He could have signed and done it. But at the end of the day, there was something he needed, and it was a political ask, and I knew it would not actually come to fruition. So I told him, I said, listen, I'll be honest with you, this deal makes a difference for the seller. We went to the seller and we had open and transparent of a
yeah,
conversation. But because neither of us needed the deal, we didn't force him to make the decision because we said, hey, this would be helpful. But the truth of the matter is,
mm,
because of that, it built so much trust that the next year they spent, we'll just say, significantly
right.
more, right? Because they knew we were looking out for their best interest. But I'll be honest with you, I'm hard pressed to believe that a lot of sellers, if they're in a position where they are stressed, they need that deal for personal gain or for their own quota's sake. I mean, they would probably force someone to try to take a
Yeah.
deal and do some unpleasant behavior, to say the least.
Yeah, it's what comes to mind is, I had Fortune 50 leadership experience, and on my exit interview on the way out to start my own business, I remember saying to the president of the company that like we should give the executives enough money that they have the confidence to make the right decisions. I was surprised as I moved up the chain and watched people making fear-based decisions based on all their payments for private schools and fancy cars and fancy houses. So yeah, it's what comes to mind when you talk about that. So I wonder, um, with reps, how, because again, so very few of us raise our hand and go, "Oh, my confidence is crushed." Like, what's the indicators for you that someone's getting clocked on your team?
Yeah, I think this could be more of an art than a science. And it's something I talk at length about with my organizations in the past, current is, again, we'll talk about it as the it factor if that makes more sense to people. But, just noticing someone's tone,
Hmm.
noticing shifts in behavior. You can also use the data. You can see activity levels. You can see results. There's a lot of things that happen, right? And just like in sports, again, you go through sometimes a dry spell and people have to pick it back up and regain their confidence. A lot of times it's honestly just noticing. And this is why having the people aspect of sales is so important, because if you don't genuinely love your people, you're probably not going to notice a lot of those people oriented things.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why people always say, hey, we don't quit companies, we quit leaders. And at the end of the day, like that's a whole principle in and of itself is, does a leader
Yes.
instill confidence? I failed miserably in my career at instilling confidence. I've succeeded phenomenally at instilling confidence. Sometimes, right? Like we win some, we
Mm.
lose some, but I mean, we all go through it. Like, and the other side of confidence is could be insecurity. I don't care
Ah,
who
good
you are.
point.
We all struggle with it. I struggle with it every single day. It's I think Brene Brown talks about it from the perspective of the story we tell ourselves, and it's just the truth of the matter is we all go through it. And
Yeah.
usually the highest achievers go through it more than anyone
Oh yeah.
else, right?
Well, it's the dreaded imposter complex, imposter
Imposter
syndrome,
syndrome.
whatever. Yeah, it's like
Yes.
I've been there, especially as someone who sort of doesn't come from a lot. So I've been in situations where it's like I don't belong here. Everybody in the room knows I don't belong here, and that's yeah. I think that's a really important point. And so what? Yeah, if you see someone whose confidence is down, what are your sort of tips and tricks? Like how do you lift them up?
Yeah, I love that. There's the tactical and then there's sort of like the motivational, because I am a big believer that a lot of it's internal, intrinsic. Um, I'm going to give a story of something that I'll give an example of one time that I was talking to a seller. Um, we had to have a tough conversation.
Hmm.
They weren't getting the results that they really wanted, but the response when I had this conversation blew me away and it taught me a lot about confidence. What was happening is the seller was not getting the results. But if you look at the activities, right? When you look at any sales leader, it's the same 3 to 4 basic things. Are you bringing in the revenue? No. Let's look at pipeline. No. Let's look at, are you meeting with your prospects and customers? No. Then are you doing the activities, right? You just go down the spectrum, right? Very simple. This seller was putting in more dials, more emails, more activity, more reach outs than anyone else in the entire organization. So this seemed odd, but this was what was interesting in the response. This seller goes, I know I can do better. Like literally, it did not phase this person at all,
Yeah.
literally at all.
Yeah.
And literally the response when I asked, like, hey, this is awesome. I love this response. How are you able to have this response? It was based in the fact that the seller knew that he was doing all the work, all the activities.
Yes.
So what was really amazing about what this seller was telling me is that the confidence was in the fact that if the work ethic was there, you can just tweak some of the messaging, some of the how, because it wasn't a work ethic issue. So the confidence was like, I'm doing all the things necessary in the time that I have. I just need a little bit of coaching.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little skill coaching. Maybe it's just something, a small tweak. That's a great place to be. So to answer the question directly is do the work. They do say the old adage was practice makes perfect, but the truth of the matter is perfect practice makes perfect, but you have to start with the practice
Yeah.
and then you tweak it and you tweak it and you tweak it. But if you're not even willing to get in and do the work and do the grind, the fastest way to get out of I'll use a shooting dry spell in basketball, shoot more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny you say that because that was gonna be a question I was just gonna ask you because I was forced to think not forced to, I kind of enjoyed thinking through, like, my own confidence spells. It's one thing to talk about somebody else's, but you and I started talking about, like, ours, and that's the personal part, and that's exactly I started thinking about how do I work through this, and I was gonna ask you about action, how you felt about action, and that works for me as well to say, okay, but it's also good action. If your confidence is down and you're just sort of throwing slop, but yeah, I find that helps me a lot. Like I go to a checklist right away and go, okay, what are the leading indicators? What are the 10 things I have to do? And start checking those off. Yeah, it feels good. So I'm glad to hear you say that because it definitely works for me.
I'll share one other one that tends to work. When I was younger, again, I've dealt with, I think we all do, but I'll tell you mine is I deal a lot with insecurity from a lot of different things. And when I talked to mentors, coaches, counselors growing up in my 20s, there was a question. Most of us have a question that drives our life. The one that drives me that we found is I'm always subconsciously asking myself is, am I good enough?
Yeah.
Am I good enough? And so every day, naturally, my body and my mind and everything would wake up and I'd strive to prove to myself that I'm good enough. Right. And so, how this relates to gaining confidence back is over the last 25 years, there's ups and downs. We all have it. Right. But I had to remember that if I look back, I've been massively successful in a lot of endeavors.
Yeah.
All of us have. And when you remember and go back to what worked for you in the past, it's somewhat of an indicator of what can work in the
Sure.
future.
Yeah.
Some of it may not be the tactics, but I mean, hard work, having a great attitude, all the cliches that we talk about. But then sometimes there are things that uniquely are you're gifted in, right? And you go to those and that's where you can increase your strengths, right? So just knowing that you can look back and say, I've been successful. The other one that I've been thinking about a lot lately as I've been coaching and helping people is the whole seed and soil, um, I guess, parable, if you will.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think any human being is inherently a bad seed, but you don't plant a cactus in the jungle. You don't plant an oak tree in the desert, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's the Einstein quote that says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to spend its whole life thinking it's stupid.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
we don't actually have stupid people. Sometimes the giftings that we each have need to be utilized in the right way. So confidence a lot of times is, we talk about external versus internal. We have to be aware enough. What are we really good at? I'm probably only good at about two, maybe three things.
Yeah.
I'm really not that great at a lot of things, right? So just knowing that about yourself and putting yourself in situations where you can utilize that, oh
Yeah.
man, that does worlds for your confidence.
Well, and you just said something too about like external stuff, and again, processing through this topic because it was so interesting to me. I started thinking about like what whacks my confidence, and it's usually some kind of an external event, right? Something doesn't go well, and I think you and I spoke about this a week or so ago that I read something about looking at events and not classifying them as good or bad, which like change. And by the way, I went back to that same sort of reading over and over again every evening to go back and jack it into my brain, and I found that's if and even good sometimes I try to have the same reaction to really good stuff or really bad stuff and the thought process is this is neither good nor bad. this is just what happened. And then it goes to what you were saying before. Then you can make better decisions. This is neither good nor bad. I'm going to take all that mess out of there and say, this is a thing that happened. Now, what
Mhm.
do I need to do? What are the proper next steps? What decisions do I need to make? And that filter helps me an awful lot to keep from getting clocked by whatever this thing is that happened that was maybe perceived as bad.
Oh, that is so good. I love that. There was a workshop I went to probably, yeah, in my early 20s, and they said something similar. And at that point, the way they stated it is they go, life is empty and meaningless. And they do it to create a reaction,
Yes.
obviously. And it was so hard for me to fathom until I started to get older and experienced. And it was that we get to attach a meaning to anything that happened. If we stub our toe, some people are like, well, that's a sign and blah, blah, blah. Like,
Yeah.
what? If it's raining, right? Like there's songs like it's like rain on your wedding day. And, like what could that mean? And we get to attach the meaning. And I actually find that very much a place that, man, that gives me a lot of empowerment based on a lot of our belief system. That's okay, right? I have a certain belief system, so I attach a meaning, and I believe that that meaning serves me well, right? So that is so good because, especially in sales, like how do you quickly, like athletes do, forget the last play and move forward to the next one, forget the last loss? You have to have that sort of mentality because um, I mean, what are some of the highest close ratios that, or even average close ratios people have? It's almost like baseball stats, right? Like
Yeah.
we say that there's 25 to 30% close ratio. That means you're actually, most companies are losing more than they're winning. And you got to have a short memory.
Yep. Yes.
You can't attach meaning to that, right? At
Well,
all.
so speaking of attaching meaning, there is a kind of a Zen parable about the second arrow, right? And I don't know if you ever heard this, but the first arrow is real; it's in your shoulder, and there is pain from that arrow. So that one's legit. The second arrow is when you start whining, "Oh, why me? Why did I get shot with this arrow?" And it's funny too because a buddy of mine's a veterinarian, and he was talking about animals. He's like, animals don't have that. Right. They have the pain and they do what they need to do to address the pain. But as best, he said, as best we can tell, they're not whining about, oh, why me? Why me? And I think that's part of that. This is neither good nor bad. This just happened. Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking about when I thought about this topic, this has been super top of mind as we see the world sort of consolidating, if you will, right? This idea of confidence and relating it to being aware of where your skills are. I think sometimes people lack confidence because, again, going back to seed and soil, they're not in the right place or they're not being self-aware enough to know that their skills don't translate, right? So
Yeah.
what do I mean by that? To put it very directly, if you were to look at the entire profession of sales, how many sellers got into sales as a choice?
Yeah.
Most people get into sales and they fall into it. But I was talking to somebody the other day about this that if you took all the sellers in the world, how many of them, what percentage of them should really be in sales? And we settled on like between 25 and 40%. And part of it when it comes to confidence, because I was helping someone the other day on this and it was interrelated, but the question that I asked, I go, if you could spend hours talking about anything, what would it be? And the response was family, cooking, gardening, flowers. Great. Those are things that they're very passionate about. I go, ask me that in reverse. Stephen, what would you talk about for hours about, like nonstop? You want to know my response? Sales, sports, and a third one was actually religion. But
Yeah.
the point is, like, your confidence also comes from what you either love more than anything else. And for me personally, it's I love this profession. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. I could talk about it for hours on end.
Yeah.
And how many sellers look at it as a job versus their profession. And confidence has a lot to do with that. Because if you give me a golf club, ain't no, I feel like I'm an athlete, semi.
Yeah.
Can't play golf, can't play tennis. Like I'm good at like about 4 sports:
Yeah.
football, volleyball, basketball, soccer. That's it. Any other sport? No, terrible. Have no confidence whatsoever. So I think that self-awareness of knowing whether it's a profession or job, especially in sales confidence is, in my opinion, a very real thing.
This is so cool. Like this whole discussion is it's kind of, there's a thing about communication. You have to be super vulnerable to really communicate. And I think like even for both of us, as we teed up this topic, it's like there's a certain vulnerability to going, we're talking about confidence as leaders,
Yeah.
and yeah, I commend you for bringing it up and going there with me on the podcast. You're super generous with your time, your ideas, your energy. And I will look forward to, once we post this, like I'm going to be really interested to see if somebody watches this to like throw in the comments like, what do you do, what's your trick, because I think we need to build a little database in this community of us that do
Yeah.
this kind of work. So yeah, I really 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 appreciate it. And yeah, I feel like we could triple the time on this subject. Maybe we'll come back and hit it again. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. The whole personal side of what's happening in your life impacting your work. I think people forget about that. And we try to bifurcate. That's a whole topic around confidence for another day,
Yep.
is just making sure that you're happy in life. It impacts your job so much,
Great.
especially in sales.
Great point. Because earlier we talked about it being systemic with your team, and now if we broaden that team to outside, that yeah, that is definitely like another whole sort of branch of this to talk about that I hadn't even anticipated. So maybe that will be the next one, tying it together. But again, thank you so much, man. It's been really fun.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.